Well, welcome to Amplified. We're glad you're here. I'm excited to have just us back in middle school again. I enjoyed having the high schoolers here. I thought it was fun. It was enjoyable. You guys showed them up tremendously. And so, except in the games, as was mentioned earlier, you guys just kept letting us down. But I'm excited to be back. I'm excited to be speaking to you guys again. It was nice to kind of take a break from our series going from Genesis to Revelation, but tonight we are jumping back in, and we will be in 1 Samuel chapter 15. So if you have your Bibles, go to 1 Samuel chapter 15. Now, it's been 6 weeks since we've been in this series because of our Christmas party, because of vacation, and then because of the last 3 weeks with the high schoolers. So we're going to have to go back and we're going to look at what happened last time we studied the book of Samuel and where we are at. But before we do that, I want to give you a heads up on what we're going to be learning about tonight. It's a subject I know you guys know all too well. We are going to be talking about obedience. All right? We're going to be talking about obedience. And obedience is important because what happens when you don't fully obey? Right? You get into trouble. Like, for instance, let's think of some things that could have gone horribly wrong if the people involved didn't obey. Noah, he builds this great boat, this great ark, just like God told him, but he doesn't build a door. All right? So now there's just this big gaping hole in the ark. That could be pretty disastrous, right? We probably wouldn't be here today if he didn't fully obey and put the ark there. Or let's say you're going to go on a trip across country and you're going to go on a plane. And so you go to the airport, you're looking at the plane, you're excited because it's a brand new plane fresh off the assembly line. But what you don't know is that the guy who was building it was in a hurry to get to a dinner date with his family. And so when he was strapping on the wings, instead of putting 25 nuts and bolts to secure it to the plane, he only put 4. Right? Is that the kind of plane you want to be on? No. Okay, you want somebody who followed the directions, somebody who obeyed fully. And so tonight we are going to be looking at King Saul and how his partial obedience led to his kingdom being stripped from him and the consequences of his actions. So let's jump into our story. But before we jump into chapter 15, let's rewind a little bit and remember who King Saul is. So King Saul, obviously I've kind of given it away. He's the king of Israel. But the last time we met, we learned that Israel had demanded that God give them a king. And so he obliged. And he found a man named Saul. All right? And Saul didn't want the job. All right? He didn't want the job at first. But the people were asking, and Samuel found Saul. Saul didn't want the job so much that he went and he hid in luggage of a caravan. And he found him, like with all the luggage around him, just trying to hide, and he pulls him out. And out comes Saul, and he says he's a head taller than everybody else. And he's big and he's strong. He's what you would imagine a king would look like. All right? And Israel is excited because they have a king that fits their standards. And so Saul began ruling Israel. And he's ruling Israel and everything's going great. He's going into battle. He's defending. He's conquering lands. He's helping to secure the borders. But all of these victories, all of these battles start going to his head. And he starts worrying more about what the people of Israel think than what God thinks. And he begins to enter into disobedience. All right? And that leads us to our story tonight. In chapter 15, God decides in verse 1 that it's time for them to punish Elimelech, or Elimelech. I can't do it, so I'm just going to call it by the American slang, which is Elimelech. And Elimelech is the leader of the Amalekites. Now, Elimelech has passed away. So now it's just these people, the Amalekites. And God goes to Saul and he says, it's time to punish them. I want you to go and I want you to destroy them completely. Leave nothing left. I want you to kill men, women, children, infants, and all of their livestock. I want nothing left. And a lot of us are probably going, whoa, God, easy, take a step back. How could God do something like that? Well, we have to understand God's perspective on this. Number one, Amalek and the Amalekites had attacked Israel on their way back up from Egypt. So they're trying to come back up. They see it as a good opportunity to try to rob them of their riches that they brought out of Egypt, and they go and attack them. Now, God protected Israel and pushed them back, but there was no repercussions for their attack. But not only that, as we learn as we get further into verse 15, we learn that they are a pretty atrocious people. They worship these pagan gods, and as part of their worship, they sacrifice their own children and their own young teenage girls. And they sacrifice them to gods, and they live this pagan world, and they're becoming so strong and so powerful that all of their beliefs and this horrific system of human sacrifice is being spread amongst the region of Israel, or the land of Israel and Canaan that we live in. And so God decides in His mercy for the rest of the world that it's time to wipe them out. And so He says, I want you to go and I want you to just utterly destroy the Amalekites. But it wasn't all bad news, because you see there was this subgroup of the Amalekites called the Kenites. And they believed and supported Israel. And they were, even though they were a part of the Amalekites, God found favor in them. And so when they approached the Kenites, God said, hey, look, we're going to go and destroy the Amalekites, which you are a part of. But we want to spare you, so depart from here so that we can go about our business. And so Saul leads the army, and they go through and they wipe out everything that's there, right? That's exactly what they did, exactly what God says, except they did not kill King Agag, all right? They didn't kill him. And then they started looking, and they looked at all of these wonderful sheep and goats and camels and donkeys, and they decided, you know what? We'll slaughter the puny and the no good ones, but let's bring all the good, healthy, strong ones. Let's bring them back for us. Let's bring them back for us. And so while they wiped out almost all the people and almost all of the livestock, they still didn't fully obey what God had commanded them to. And God was distraught. He began to regret that Saul was king. And he went to Samuel and he told Samuel all that Saul had let the Israelites do. And Samuel was grieved, and he began mourning for Saul. The next morning he sets out and he goes to find Saul. Saul is on this mountaintop in Gilgal, and he has erected this massive stone to celebrate this wonderful victory that they had given. And as he's coming up this hill, Saul sees Samuel and goes, I have done it! I have done what God has commanded. I have obeyed God, and we have wiped out the Amalekites. And Samuel goes, and then what are all these sheep that are baaing over here, and all these goats that are neighing, and all these cattle, and what is all of this? And Saul looks at Samuel and goes, oh, don't worry about that. The people wanted to save those animals to sacrifice to God. Samuel looks at Saul and he goes, weren't you just a lowly nobody from nowhere? You were a nothing from nowhere. And God chose you. He exalted you to be king over all of Israel. Shouldn't you be so honored and so grateful that you would obey God fully? Because He said, go and utterly destroy them. But you did not do that. You left the animals. You didn't do it. What do you have to say for yourself? And Samuel for the second time goes, Saul for the second time goes, no, we did. We killed all of the women, all of the children, all of the men, except for the king. And Samuel I can imagine Samuel just giving them like that's not everybody kind of look. All right? And then he goes, and we killed all the bad animals, but again, it was the men. It was the army. I gave in, and they were going to bring back these animals and sacrifice them to God. Samuel looks at him and calls him to the carpet again. He goes, no, You failed. You have disobeyed God. And because of that, I and God are going to depart from you, and your kingdom will be taken. When Saul hears this, he immediately repents, and he goes, whoa, 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 no, don't do that, don't do that. Look, I'm sorry, I know that I'm a sinner, I know that I've done wrong, but come back with me. Come back and show the people that you and God are still with me. And Samuel looks at him and he says, no, I will not. And he turns to walk away, and Saul reaches down and he grabs his garment and he tears it. Which, in that day and age, imagine if what he did would be like on a red carpet, all right? You're on a red carpet, and you've got these famous people are wearing these expensive suits, super nice suits, and somebody goes up and just rips the suit off of them, all right? Like it would just be like, everybody would be like, what in the world is going on? But Samuel calmly looks down, and he looks over at Saul and he says, just as you have torn my garment, so will God tear your kingdom from you. And he walks out. On his way out of town, he stops by the prison, and he calls for King Agag to come out. King Agag is brought out before him, and he thinks, oh great, here's their priest, I'm going to be spared. And he kneels down before the priest. And Samuel reaches over and draws a sword from one of the military men or the guards and kills Agag to show that the obedience of God was necessary. Samuel returned to his home. And while he was alive, he never returned to Saul. And so we have this tragic story of Saul losing his kingdom. And we almost feel bad for Saul, right? I mean, he was doing what he thought was best. But there's a problem. He only partially obeyed God. He only partially obeyed God. He did 90% of what he was supposed to do. But there was that 10% that he didn't. And you see, here's the first point for tonight. There is no such thing as partial obedience. There is either obedience or there is disobedience. There's no such thing as full or as partial obedience. Saul was proud. He was looking for appreciation. He was excited that he had this great battle and the people loved him, and surely God would be proud. But what he didn't realize is that he had not obeyed God. And because of that, he lost everything. And a lot of us would like to look at King Saul and shake our heads and say, poor Saul. But you know, he didn't obey God. But the truth of the matter is, we don't need to look at Saul. We need to look in a mirror and shake our heads at ourselves. Because we are full of partial obedience. Our whole lives are full of it. I mean, how many of you have partially obeyed? All right? Most of you should be raising your hands. My hand's up. All right? You didn't do everything. Okay, I'll give you an example. Here's an example. Okay, maybe not all of you have animals, but those of you who have animals, all right? Your mom or dad tells you, hey, I need you to go outside, I need you to pick up the dog or cat or whatever animal. I need you to go pick up the poop in the backyard. And you go out there. I'm saying this because this is a daily occurrence in my house. All right? And you go out there and you pick up 10 piles of dog doo. All right? And you pick it up, you put it away, and then you come inside. Then a little bit later, your dad or your mom goes out and you're going to play in the backyard and you're doing stuff, and your dad's barefoot and he's walking through the grass, and all of a sudden, smush. Hey, I thought you picked up the dog poop. Oh, yeah, Dad, I did. You know, I picked up the dog poop. My foot says different. Right? My foot says you didn't do the job. Well, I did. And you're right, you did. You did pick up the dog poop. But you didn't fully obey. You didn't complete the job. And so you were disobedient in your actions. All right? Or the other example is your mom goes, hey, I want you to clean your room, right? How many of you have to clean your room on a daily basis? All right, yeah, most of us. And so what happens? What happens, right? I used to be a kid. Here's what happens. You go in, there's a bunch of stuff on your floor. You grab it all up, you put it into a big pile, you throw it into the you throw it into the closet, and then you slam the door as quick as you can so it doesn't fall back out, right?
Oh, that's
and you put it in there. And then you go and you start playing your video games, you start hanging out with your friends, start watching a movie, doing what you want to do, right? And then what happens? Mom comes in. Let's go check out the room. And here comes Mom walking along. Okay, I see the floor's clean. Hey, how come you didn't make your bed? Well, you said clean my room, not make my bed. Come on. You know that's part of the deal. And then she walks over and she grabs the closet door, and your heart stops. Don't open it, Mom. Don't open it, Mom. Don't open it, Mom. Crash! I thought you said you cleaned your room. Well, I did, Mom. I took everything off the floor, and I put it into the closet. Well, is the closet part of your room? Yes, it is. On a floor plan or a blueprint, it's part of the room. But here's the thing. The point is this. The point is this. You did not fully obey. You did enough to make it look like you obeyed, but you only partially obeyed. And the truth of the matter is, as we've learned, is it's not partial obedience. It's complete disobedience. All right? And it costs us something. So we have to understand that there's no such thing as partial obedience. There's either fully obey or you are disobedient. Right? Here's another thing. How many of you are disobedient of God? Most of us raise our hands, right? The fact is, we come to church and we say, hey, I want to follow God. And we come to church and we sing worship and we listen to the sermon. But yet, when we go home, when we're at school, we're full of lies. We're full of inappropriate language. Some of us are stealing stuff. And while we come to church and we pretend to obey God, our hearts are far from it. When I come to church, right? When I cleaned my room, I picked up 10 piles of dog poop, right? We all say that. Those are all the excuses we give to our parents. But the second point of our message tonight is this. There is no way to justify disobedience. Saul tried twice. Right? He tried twice. He said, I did what God told me. I wiped all the people out, except for that king and all these animals. Well, and then he tries to justify it. What does he do? He tries to blame who? The Israelites, the army. He tries to blame them. He goes, it's their fault. And then again, after he's called to the carpet, he goes, well, I did exactly what you said when it comes to the people, except for King Agag. But, you know, the animals, that was the people. Samuel, that was the people. And he tries to make an excuse. But disobedience is disobedience, no matter how good your excuse seems. When we look at Saul, we can look at how he was, or the reasons he was disobedient. Why was he disobedient? Number one is he was seeking to gain approval from others. So he's looking at this situation from a human standpoint, right? He can look at it and he can see, okay, hey, the army really wants to keep these livestock. So if I let them keep them, it'll be good because they'll profit, they will get the loot, they will be happy, and they will serve me. That seems like a good thing. But the problem is they're not the ones who were fighting the battle. God was the one who allowed them to be victorious. The spoils of war were his. Now he kept King Ahab. He kept him. And at first it seems like a good thing. Well, you know, one king's going to respect another king. He's going to take care of him. He's going to protect the king and then allow him to be there. But the reality was that's not the reason he kept him. He kept him to parade him around in front of the army and to show the people, look, I am a conqueror of kings. He would parade it around the country so that the surrounding areas would say, hey, look, they conquered the Amalekites. They're carrying their king and parading it in front. And so everything he did was for selfish gain. And again, we'd like to just shake our head and say, poor Saul, he should have known better. But at the same time, we are in the same boat. You see, we'll quickly pick up 10 piles of dog poop and throw it away. We'll quickly just gather everything up and throw it into our room. We'll scribble and race through our homework to make sure that it's done, just so we can run outside and play, just so we can go and play the video game, just so we can go and watch the movie or do something. But then what happens? Mom happens. And Mom comes along and she goes, hey, this isn't done right. She goes outside and she yells at you. She goes upstairs and she flips off your video games while you're in the middle of a game and it just frustrates you. All right? She turns off your movie. She brings you in and she goes, you didn't do this right. Sit down and do it right. And then you sit there and you drag your feet and you piddle. But I just want to play. Right? And what we thought was going to benefit us actually ends up hurting us. We think, man, if I can just quickly get this done and throw it out there, then I can go and play my games. But if we would have taken an extra 10, 15, or 20 minutes to do the job right, to finish our homework correctly, we would have had the rest of the night. But instead, we chose to go for 15 or 20 minutes of fun and the rest of the night of misery as we had to fix what we did wrong the first time. Because we choose not to be obedient. We think that impressing others is worth our disobedience. We think that, I should obey my parents, or I should follow the rules, or I should do this, but these friends of mine, they want me to do something else. And so we choose our friends over the authority that God has put in our lives. And we end up being disobedient in all sorts of ways. But most of all, we are disobedient to God. And it's heartbreaking. Because here's the deal. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of times disobedience looks really good. All right? It's like a chocolate cake. The best chocolate cake you've ever had. It's shiny on the outside. It's got 4 or 5 layers. It looks so delicious. It's got white piping around the side. You put it into your mouth and angels start singing and lights come down and everything is just going amazing. You're just like, this is the greatest thing. All right? And just everything is off the chart. And that's what disobedience looks like. But then it's so good you keep eating the cake and then you get sick. Or you eat the cake and it's gone. And you're left with nothing. Except an empty plate and a stomachache. And that's what disobedience looks like. Because here is a fact that you need to understand. Satan's greatest trick is by making disobedience look amazing. He gives us this amazing, great, unbelievable reward right up front. Man, if I just cross this line, I'm going to have this amazing chocolate cake. But then once the chocolate cake is gone, you have nothing to show for your disobedience. But you see, God is different. God says, I want you to take your time. I want you to work at it. I want you to follow directions. I want you to be obedient. And in the end, you will have a prize greater than anything you can imagine. And He offers us an eternal reward. Yeah, it's going to take a lot longer to get there. It's going to take a lot longer to realize this gift. But here's the deal. Once we have it, it never goes away. Once we receive it, it is there forever. So we need to be obedient. We need to follow God. Don't go after the chocolate cake. It's delicious. But it'll leave you with nothing in just a few minutes. And that's what sin is. That's Satan's trick. It's like a fish and a hook. They've got that big, delicious worm, right? That juicy, succulent. It's not succulent to us, but it's succulent to them, right? It's wriggly and nasty for us. And they've got that worm. And they go up to grab that worm. And what's inside that worm? A hook. And they bite down and they go, oh, this worm is so delicious. Ow! What it? Whoop! Whoop! Why am I out of water? And now I'm dead. And sin is the same way. Sin does the same thing. It's that delicious worm with a hook. And then we're left for nothing but our own consequences. With disobedience and temptation, those that push you into it, those that encourage you to disobey, they're there while you're disobeying. But the moment those consequences come running, they're nowhere to be found. And you're left on your own. So that's what we have to be aware of. But here's the deal. In closing, our obedience should be out of gratefulness. And it should be. It should be out of gratitude towards God. It shouldn't be because of the promise of eternity. It should be because of what God has done. Saul was once a nobody from nowhere that no one knew about. And God took him and he elevated him to be the king. And in verse 17, Samuel calls him out and says, you should be grateful. Why would you not obey a God? Why do you care more about what Israel thinks than the God that elevated you up? He should have been grateful. And he should have obeyed. And in the same way, we are sinners. As we learned the last few weeks, enemies of God. Rebels against his cause. But he didn't look at us and cast us away. He looked at us and said, I love you. My love is so great for you. I'm going to send my son to die on the cross. And he takes us and elevates us from his enemies who deserve nothing but his justice. And he makes us his children. And he elevates us to where we are sons and daughters who are worthy of inheriting his kingdom. And we should be grateful for that. We should be so grateful that we are willing to obey. Willing to go through the hard times, through the tough times. And obey God for what he's done for us and for the reward that is at the end. You see, it is Jesus' obedience that earned our acceptance in God's eyes. And we need to be grateful for that. So the question for tonight is, will you choose to obey? Or will you take the chocolate cake that'll fade away? Let's pray. Maybe there's some of you tonight who have gone through unbelievable circumstances. And you need somebody to pray for you. Here in a moment, there's going to be leaders standing around the room, and you can find one of those leaders, and they will pray with you. Maybe you just need to come forward and pray to God and say, God, I'm sorry I have been disobedient, but I want to change my life. You can come to this altar, you can come to this stage, and you can pray to God. Or maybe there's some of you tonight who are hearing this message of Jesus Christ for the first, fifth, or maybe even 100th time, but tonight it meant something. And you're ready to put down the chocolate cake and come to know Christ as your Savior. Here in a minute, when I finish praying and the music begins to pray, step out. find one of these adults and they would gladly talk to you. Father, thank you so much for this lesson from Saul on the importance of obedience. Father, I pray that you will help us to be obedient and to follow you, obey our parents, and do all that they ask. Father, I pray that if there's anyone here tonight who does not know you, you will tug on their heart and give them the courage to step out and grab a leader and ask them, how can I know Jesus? Thank you for this wonderful evening, Father. In your name we pray. Amen. Go ahead and stand. There's going to be music playing in the background. Please no talking or moving about unless you're talking to the leader. Come to the stage. People are dealing with all kinds of issues, so please be respectful.